To master your life, you need to master your energy and emotions. And so we have a fairly straightforward process for that we call GIST, that just stands for gratitude, intention, surrender, and trust. The more you're in a grateful state, and there are other good states as well, like appreciation, love, abundance, but the more you're in those heart-centered, open states, the more likely, and I say this is a little bit spiritual, but it's very based in physics, the more likely the universe will respond to your intentions. So then when you set your intentions and goals, because they're coming from that heart-centered place, they're more likely to be, anything that is more likely to be a win for society, yourself, and the other people involved, the universe is far more likely to support.
This is Impact, the podcast where we explore entrepreneurship, mindset, and health to provide you with the ingredients for an unregrettable version of your life story. In 1910, a report came out. It's called the Flexner Report, and it was in part funded and supported by the Rockefeller family and their foundation. And the Flexner Report highlighted the rigorous scientific approach of German medical schools and European medical schools and philosophy at that time. The American scientific approach to medicine that followed in the aftermath of the Flexner Report is in part, if not entirely, the reason and nature of our modern science-based medical system that we know today. One of the things that happened in the aftermath of this report and in the funding that flowed to this new German model of science was the all but elimination of bioenergetic medicine and research into bioenergetic systems of medicine. One of the criticisms of some of the modalities within naturopathic medicine, the training and background of my career and my education, is that it lacks evidence. And the interesting thing that I have always found around this notion of evidence is that we only have evidence when we can fund and create it. A lack of evidence doesn't mean the lack of something's existence. It simply means the lack of reported data related to a scientific observation. See, science starts with an observation. When appropriately funded or guided through universities or other private institutions, we can start to unpack and understand those observations. Some of those observations go nowhere, while others we are able to unravel and unpack the mechanism of chemical action or energetic action, and draw from it hypotheses and truths. Truths that can be challenged down the road, because science isn't static. Science is a process we created to understand the world around us. But when science itself is biased towards understanding only one version of the world, the chemical version of the world, the abundance of evidence that flows from that predominant philosophy biases our own understanding of truth versus belief. I can't sit here and tell you that everything I have observed in terms of bioenergetic medicine is true or can be supported by our man-made system known as scientific inquisition. I can share with you that many of the bioenergetic experiences and modalities and interventions that I have leveraged in practice can now be quantified through modern scientific tools. So much of what we believe to be true, so many of the things that we take a sigh of relief in knowing came from science actually emerged to our attention because of our own human biases. And the Flexner Report is an example of the intersection of history and personal interest, the Rockefeller interest of controlling both the chemical and the oil industries in America at that time, and the subsequent fallout in terms of how we view some of these elements as a society. Now, I share this conversation not to blame any one individual. In fact, not to place blame at all. Simply to add context to how our history has evolved, how our bias has actually driven rise to industries as large as the pharmaceutical industry in North America, a $1.25 trillion North American industry alone. I share this context because it is important as I walk into the conversation that I'm going to share with all of you today. This conversation is part of a series called The Future of Health. And exploring the future of health means that we look at a variety of verticals and access points to better quality of life. Better quality of life does not just mean better treatments. Better quality of life can also mean access to preventative interventions unrivaled in that post-Flexner medical model and system. Today, my conversation is with a forward-thinking bioenergetic researcher named Harry Massey. Harry has a variety of companies that build bioenergetic tools to help us quantify what's happening in the energetic field, and infoceuticals used to actually treat the body's energetic field. It is a realm few of us have had exposure to in the past. And what I'm excited to deliver to you today is a series of ideas and a compelling conversation about some of the ways energy can be leveraged for healing and prevention and higher quality of lives in the future. It is sincerely my pleasure to introduce you to my friend, Harry Massey. Harry Massey, welcome to Impact.
Meghan Walker, good to be here.
Well, this is a conversation that I feel like the universe has been like setting us up for the last little while. Your name and your work have been familiar to me for a great deal of time. And I just kept putting it out there. I'm like, when the timing is right, I'm going to have the chance to meet the famous Harry Massey. And I was so fortunate to finally have that opportunity at the end of the summer. And now it just keeps happening. So clearly this was meant to be. Now, I know a little bit about your story, Harry, but before we start to talk about the future of health and blow people's minds with your insight and perspective around where we are heading, I'm wondering if you could share with my audience a little bit about you and your story, because it's a compelling part of why we're here.
Sure. So when I was 20, I basically used to do lots of rock climbing. I would climb these overhanging cliffs above the sea with the waves crashing below. I'd climb 4,000 meter overhanging peaks in the French Alps. We'd also do ice climbing. And, unfortunately, I had these 3 climbing incidents that led me to being bedridden with chronic fatigue syndrome for the next 7 years. I can quickly take you through those. So the first time we went ice climbing up Ben Nevis, and ice is really, really brittle. And once when I put my ice axe in, unfortunately, the ice shattered and I ended up falling down onto the steep slopes below. I ended up in a lot of back pain, but I think I was 20 or 21 at the time. And, I basically ignored it. And it wasn't actually for another 2 years when I'd had a paragliding accident that I was told that I'd fractured my spine before. So I actually fractured my spine that day. Another few months went past. I went out to the French Alps, was climbing up a mountain there. I started getting this fever, got down off the mountain as soon as I could. That turned out to be glandular fever. So I checked into a hotel, sweated it out, went back to university, got through my final year at university, my exams, got my first job, was fired because I was basically getting increasingly exhausted and having to take all these days off because I basically didn't recover from the glandular fever. It's sort of like post-viral fatigue. I thought I could heal myself through just good exercise. So I went back out to the Alps thinking I'll do 3-4 months and heal myself with good French food and mountaineering. I couldn't have been more wrong. I just ended up so exhausted. I ended up stuck in a tent for around, I think it was for 10 days, just eating dried bananas till I could get the energy to get myself back to England. I would pull off the motorway every 45 minutes to sleep, get back in the car, and, just sort of slowly drove myself back. And that really was the beginning of being bedridden for around 7 years. I tried absolutely everything you can possibly think of, from like all the normal functional med stuff like ozone, IVs. I did Gerson therapy, the Holder Clark stuff. I actually also did like a 3-week water fast, and it was actually that water fast that I ended up losing a third of my body weight. And I wasn't exactly an overweight person because I was a fit mountaineer. That really ended up making me end up being in a wheelchair and ending up bedridden. So after about 3-4 years of being bedridden, trying to try all these different things, I just thought to myself, well, why don't I study where energy comes from? Because energy, fundamentally, I didn't have energy. Instead of trying to get rid of like all these toxins and viruses. And just in looking at that, I came across this term bioenergetics, which is the study of energy in living systems. So I asked my doctor at the time if he knew any energy researchers. He put me in touch with this professor from Australia called Professor Peter Fraser. I wrote to him via fax, actually, and then he sent me back this paper, and the headline said, "I don't know why I'm sending you this." And I read it. Didn't make much sense, but you can tell when something is like really sort of out of the box and extraordinary. So I recontacted him, and I had this idea to create a home wellness system. So I just thought, if you could help people get well at home, A, I might get better, B, other people would get better, and C, I could generate an income outside of like living with my parents. He sort of looked at me and he's like, well, if this kid is going to get anywhere with this, I'm going to have to get him better. So I became his research guinea pig, and he started sending me what we now call an pharmaceutical. I'll explain that later, but it's basically a remedy that will trigger a healing response. And he was sending me these posts. I would get these incredible reactions. So, for instance, like the first thing we wanted to do was deal with all the autoimmune viruses that were going on in me. I got this 2 to 3 day fever, and then that fever went away. It wasn't like I was totally magically healed, but a lot of my autoimmune symptoms started to lessen. He made me one called ESR, that stands for emotional stress release, because I was really, really constantly wired, even though I was exhausted. And then I just ended up tired and less wired. Or he made another one. He made an antidote to an MMR vaccine. I got this boil coming out on my arm from that. Basically, it was over around like 14 to 16 months. Most of my symptoms went away. And, long story short, he was in Australia. He agreed to leave Australia, and so he moved to England, where we set up an R&D company that's now called Nest Health. And we basically spent the next 10 years mapping out the energy and information of the human body field, which we see as this energetic control system. And that turned into this system that we now use to analyze the energy and health of like organs and meridians, like mind, body, and trauma. And it's also turned into like other companies and other products too. But yeah, that's the story.
Oh my gosh, there's so many things that came out of that. The first thing my brain had to say when you were telling the story is, can you share with my listeners what a fax machine is? Because it's just been the irony of the fax machine in this story, as we get into the future of health and talking about bioenergetics, is that
he didn't use email. I mean, email existed. Email didn't exist, but it was. I guess people don't know what a fax machine. Okay, so yeah, it's basically you write a letter, and this machine would read the letter, and then it would come out, the other side printer.
I know it made me laugh because of all the technology we have in medicine. We still transfer patient information between medical clinics on fax machine because it's considered like the only way to be truly confidential in sharing information. but we're not going to unpack that little blip in forward momentum in the healthcare system. When you talk about the Nest system and you talk about mapping the energetic field of the human body, I think we lost some people at Fax Machine, and then we lost a lot of other people there. When you talk about this idea of mapping the energetic field of the human body, what are you talking about?
So, the first people to do it were the Chinese, and they actually mapped out the meridians of the body 5,000 years ago. They were actually, at that point, they weren't using metal needles. They were using little shaved bamboo sticks, and they would basically notice, when they would stick it in these different points on the body, how it would affect other organs. And and it's a very iterative process, but they basically mapped out what we would call like energy channels. And it's basically how energy and information would flow through the body. So Peter originally set up the first acupuncture college in Australia, like 50 odd years ago now. But he had a very sort of research-based brain. So he started doing all these other experiments to see how the energy and information would work within different tissues and cells, and he would combine ideas from physics, but also other forms of alternative holistic medicine. So we ended up with like a much broader, fuller map of how energy and information works in the body, and it's that map that we call the human body field. Or another way that you could look at it is, if you're looking at control systems in the body, there's sort of two types of control systems. There's the chemical-based control system that pharmaceuticals work on, supplements work on, and cells have cell receptors for molecules, and they respond when a molecule hits those or locks into one of those receptors. But there's also field-based receptors, and the thing in a field-based communication system is it's much more rapid. I mean, I say it's rapid. I mean, it goes at the speed of light. That's pretty much instantaneous. And that's wonderful because in the body, you have 70 trillion cells. Whenever I see you writing things, I'm like, oh, you're going to ask me something else.
So you don't know this. I doodle while I'm podcast interviewing, and I map out where my brain is going. So just have no fear.
I'll carry on with the 70 trillion cells. So there's 70 trillion cells in the body, and actually each cell has around 3 trillion operations happening in each cell every single second. And it's almost as if by magic that our body stays alive. It manages to coordinate all those functions pretty much instantaneously. And it can't actually do that from a chemical-based control system. Like you need the chemicals, to live, to repair, to do a lot of things. However, it's not actually the fundamental control system that just keeps everything operating in real time. And to do that, you need a much faster, more rapid control system, and that's our field-based control system, which is. Yeah, it's mostly based on photons, but it does actually go across the full spectrum all the way from sound to light. So, the heart will generate a magnetic field. Even the lungs actually generate like phonons, or if you hum, there's effects from sound. But mostly, you can look at it as a photon-based communication system.
If it's principally photon-based, is light one of those pieces that can has some of the strongest influence on the body? Is it one of the things we need to both fear and respect?
Even food. So food, if you're looking at the vegetable kingdom, you've got a red pepper, yellow pepper, green dandelion leaf. It's actually the color and how light, like a wavelength of light. How light, when it's entering the body and it hits a green molecule, it's actually the wavelength that's actually having a lot of the effect on the body. So even from a food point of view, it's actually photon based.
Is there a color of food that you have a propensity towards choosing?
Definitely different people. Like if you're looking at like 5 element theory,
right? Guessing
are you a wood person?
A word person?
Wood. Are you a wood element?
Oh, yeah.
You're a wood element. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So most entrepreneurs are wood elements. So that would be green, because green things support the liver.
Fair. I'm turning around because I literally have my Principles of Chinese Medicine and 5-Element Theory textbooks sitting beside me on the floor. I'm bringing it all to the conversation. How close?
We should both have more green in our offices. Neither of us do.
Right? Yeah, I know. I've got a lot of pink. I'm not really sure what that has to. I don't know what this is doing to me. All this pink and red light in this room. How close were the ancient Chinese in terms of their understanding of that human energy field?
It's actually amazing what they did. I mean, the whole meridian system is totally accurate. It's just missing more detail that we've been able to get from modern science and different techniques to map it out further. And so, no, I mean, it's correct. It's just in its own system and language.
Limited by where we were at scientifically.
Yeah.
And our capacity to view it. You mentioned the science.
Well, I mean, there's a few things wrong, I guess, if you go down a rabbit hole. Like, I think they didn't have a spleen and things like that.
Right.
But yeah.
So when you talk about this, the modern science that has enabled us to uncover these things, I think one of the criticisms, I have received as a naturopathic doctor and someone who used energetic therapies in their practice, I'm sure you hear this conversation all the time, is, well, I don't believe in it because there's no science. Can we just attack that sentiment head on and reframe where we are actually at in terms of the science catching up with some of the I'm going to call it the observations that, came out of traditional Chinese medicine, because we didn't necessarily have the capacity to quantify it. Where are we in the coming together of belief and science related to the energetic piece?
There's an awful lot of science. There's thousands and thousands of research papers, looking at photon-based communication in the body, like magnetic fields, PMF, biofeedback. That's all, I don't know, that's all slightly boring stuff. But where the cutting edge is really looking at how information that's carried within, what we're calling this energetic control system or field-based control system, is the effects of how that information can have on the body. So, for instance, in the last year and a half, University of San Diego, California, they've been researching some of the effects of our infoceuticals. And I know we never explained infoceutical, but basically we've imprinted information into colloidal minerals. The minerals per se aren't that important. It's just a medium to carry information. But the information, it's incredible. So if you can directly input information into your operating system, you can basically get different tissues and cells to respond in certain ways. And it's like one of the experiments, we have an infoceutical called Cell Driver. Now we know clinically from the last 22 years, it's had all these beneficial effects on patients, but we hadn't actually proven it out in the laboratory. So they would just get these cell cultures. We would imprint them with Cell Driver and then just measure the density of mitochondria. And then they repeated these experiments many, many times over. And we saw a 50% increase in the density in mitochondria in the cell. We also saw a 67% protection of mitochondrial damage from reactive oxygen species, or a more layman's version of that would basically from environmental damage. I mean, generally toxins will just create like oxidation, so we can basically just protect the mitochondria from environmental damage. We saw some improvements in the cell membrane resilience, and again, translation meaning like the healthy, good nutrients are more easily able to transfer, but it keeps the bad stuff out. We also did a lot of, because it was 2020, 2021, and the university was getting grants from NIH for COVID, they were very fascinated with COVID. And actually that's how we first met them, because I met Professor Hemmel and said, well, we've got an infoceutical that we believe would help protect the body from COVID. And he was good enough to see if that was true. So they would take a culture of lung tissue where we just provide the infoceutical that protect it from COVID, they would then basically, I say inject, but I can't think of the right word right this second, but infect. So that they would basically then infect the lung tissue with COVID virus, and they use and they basically color the virus so they can measure the level of penetration, and it basically would reduce the penetration level, or another way of looking at it is basically increase its rate of rejection from lung tissue. I can give you some different experiments.
What happened? Feel like I'm sitting on the edge of my seat.
Basically it'll help protect you from COVID. They only did a 24-hour test, so I think we saw a 42% reduction in the viral penetration rate into the lung tissue in 24 hours.
Wow.
They're now actually going to do it over a whole week, because I'm pretty sure if you ran it over 5 or 6 days, it'll totally reject it, because they only did a 24-hour window. So I can't say it fully rejects it, but yeah, we shall see.
What is modern life doing to these energy systems in the body? Because we talk about, as you're describing this idea of infoceuticals and this minute amount of information and how it can have such a tremendous and cascading healing response in the body. I can only imagine how resilient the body needs to be to just walk down the street between the Wi-Fi and the overhead wires. And I'm living in the city, and the pollution and the noise and the light.
That's a really fascinating question.
I'm never leaving the soundproof podcast studio again.
News. I've got good news on that.
Okay, good, because I'm freaking out here a little bit, Harry.
In the middle of the pandemic, we bought an RV and traveled around, Montana and a bunch of other states, but Montana in particular. And we were driving past, and there was this huge sign on the roadside that said, Merry Willow radioactive healing mine. And we're like, what? So we pull in.
So of course.
And then there's these people who've different cancers, leukemia, all sorts of stuff. They go into this mine for 10 days, and they basically get healed of all their conditions. Anyway, to answer your question, so I went down this rabbit hole of hormesis, and there's a great book of all these collection of papers. Not really a book, it's a collection of research papers on hormesis. And in that book, there was ones on radioactivity. It just so happens, so there's certain areas, like if you live near a nuclear power station, you actually have a lower cancer rate, or the certain buildings would have radon gas build up that again have lower cancer rates. Or when you're looking in Japan, they have lower cancer rates, yet they had, the Hiroshima, etc. It basically turns out that very, very low dose, where it's radioactivity, heavy metals, or, Wi-Fi and EMF, it's actually a biphasic response curve. So low dose actually strengthens the body. If you like, it's a little bit like exercise. Like if you exercise hard, your body becomes stronger. So the good news on all that is actually as long as you're only exposing yourself to low amounts, which is generally the truth with, our lovely cell phones. I mean, you don't want to live right next to a big cell phone tower, but using your cell phone is relatively low dose. It actually strengthens. So I used to get pretty worried about all that stuff, and I don't so much anymore. And that biphasic response, it is actually relative to your health and your level of energy. So, if you are really sick, like I used to be, you are way, way more sensitive. So, so when you're really, really sick, it's far more important to increase your level of energy, or what I would call your body battery. You want to recuperate your energy. And when your energy levels are at a certain state, or then introducing a bit of hormesis is actually healthy.
I want to talk about this resilience notion for a quick second, because it has been my observation clinically that we are certainly not all constructed the same. And I have found it a fascinating inclusion in my practice to add a lens and ability to look at genetic profiling of patients. It doesn't tell the whole story for sure. But for you, what is the intersection between genetic information and then the research that you're doing around the energetic field and bioenergetics? Is there a relationship here? Can we tell in our genetics what something's going to look like bioenergetically, or are these two separate systems?
They're related because different genetics will give you it gives you a slightly different body field. Although within that body field, or what we call an energetic control system, there's a lot of common elements. So like when we provide information for a healthy liver or healthy heart, that's good for everyone. Like we don't go down the fully personalization route. And I would say like a general thing in the whole sort of genetics thing. So have you ever read any of Bruce Lipton's books?
Mm-hmm.
He's a big proponent of saying like the environment is far more important, or what I would say is how you're exchanging energy with your environment. What you're actually doing and your habits and how you're living is actually more important than your genetics. Unless of course you're born with a very significant genetic disease. That obviously sort of doesn't really work for that. But what Bruce Lipton would say is like 90% of your health outcome is actually your environment, not your genes. And the problem when you go really deeply down the gene route is it can be a little bit disempowering, because you're like, well, that's the genes I've got. I'm stuck.
Luck of the draw.
There's nothing I can do. Luck of the draw. That's not necessarily particularly helpful. And so, yeah, I say the good part of it is actually 99% is actually how you interact with the environment. And even like a lot of the genes that can have a negative thing, like they're sort of like a double-edged sword. And when you exchange energy or your habits properly with the environment, they can have a really good outcome as well. Like I think it's a double comp plus, which is a pretty overactive brain. The negative side in the wrong situations, it could that could give you like mania and sleeplessness and all that sort of stuff. But the positive side of it, if it when you're managing it properly and living in your environment, makes you highly intelligent and able to get lots done in a pretty sustainable way. So most genes have this double-edged sword, and now unfortunately I do think there's a bit of an over focus on the negative aspects of genes versus saying they're really double-edged.
When you talk about this environment piece, I understand that. So clinically, I would get way more obsessed with what people do every single day than what they did a few times a year. Like they would love to tell me their random vices. I'm like, no, I want to know about your daily habits. What do you change up in your environment? Like we talked a bit about this before, like leaving the bubble of my podcast studio, but like what things are you specifically attuned to in your life and in your space? Because you find they actually are maybe over-indexed in affecting that bioenergetic field.
From an information aspect, and information is probably, it might be a bit of an odd concept for people, and I might have to explain that. But, if you look at sort of the physics of reality, like we have, our physical tissue and like physical objects. Above that, really you have energy. And above that, you have information. And really, Einstein said, the sole governing force of the particle is the field. What he meant by that is it's actually fundamentally information actually governs energy, which in turn is actually creating the physical reality you see. So in terms of answering the question, like the information behind the objects in your environment, I know you can probably see, like I have all sorts of funny little things like gold Tutankhamun throne in the background, a Buddha head, a nice little crystal flower. That's actually a painting that was drawn for a Joe Dispenza art auction that's meant to be the quantum and manifestation. But so in my sort of thinking, and like Feng Shui would be, a good example. So, you want the objects that have
right.
good information behind it. Like that's from a room perspective. In terms of like daily habits, I live in the mountains, so I can go on nice long grounding walks. All that sort of stuff. Probably all the stuff everyone knows about. But
intentional pieces. tell us a little bit more about, you've done all this research and you've gone down this tool and you have this research company, but like you also have built actual products leveraged by practitioners. And I want to talk a little bit about energy for life, but like, how has all of this work actually manifested into tools that change the trajectory of how people live?
So in different ways. So we've got our practitioner company, Nest Health. We make something called a bioenergetic wellness system. In that you can basically scan the energy, or it's easier to say health, to be honest, like the health of your different organs, your different meridians, the mind-body connections. And then from that, I say we recommend pharmaceuticals that will trigger a healing response back in those parts of the body that the scan identified. We also make a My Health device. That device, it's like partly uses electrostim, partly uses these resonant frequencies that we mapped out that have a harmonious effect on different systems in the body. And it partly carries the information that we're describing those pharmaceuticals on the signal. That'll basically trigger a very direct healing response, like directly where you put it on the body. And so it's very good for like injuries and pain. It does more than that, but I'm not really allowed to claim it. So, but it'll basically help where you use the device. And then from a consumer point of view, so we haven't quite launched, but in January we're launching a company called Energy for Life. It's called a GEM, that stands for a guided energy management system that'll detect, correct, and protect your emotional energy. And with that, so in the traditional Chinese medicine idea, you can pick up like 29 pulses by feeling the pressure and basically the shape of the pulse. We've been able to use a PPG sensor that'll categorize the shape of your pulse wave. And actually, before you mentioned about your Whoop, so a Whoop is only looking at heart rate.
Look, I've got all the things, Harry. So I'm excited.
Got all the things. Okay. Well, yeah. So it's looking at heart rate variability, and it's tracking your movement with a little movement sensor. And those are actually all data points from like yesterday, and it works out an algorithm of what it thinks is going on.
Right.
But it's not actually telling you right now your actual vitality. But if a TCM practitioner went like this, he will be able to tell you, or she, that you're depleted right then. And so that's quite interesting. So basically it's looking at that full shape. We can then categorize it using some TCM principles, and then we translate that into actually like 5-element theory and emotional language, because it's detecting, correcting, protecting your emotional energy. Although if you're trained in TCM, you would understand what organs it's affecting to. Again, I'm not allowed to claim that for a consumer product, but that's the
fair
games. And then it has a pendant it'll basically imprint the biosignatures directly into your body. We do it over the heart, because we can pick up your pulse. We can actually pulse PMF at exactly in the same resonance as your heartbeat. And so then we're putting information in just as your heart is beating, and so your heart field like travels 5 meters out, and so it'll carry the information to the rest of the body. And again, with that, we can correct your like any meridians that are distorted. And more importantly, but we're also helping all of the emotions. And really the point of all of that is like the more awareness we can give people into their emotions and overall energy, then we can help save people's energy, but basically make people's energy use much more efficient. Because if your use of energy is more efficient, then you end up with a higher level of energy available, what we would call your body battery. And if you've got more energy available than you need on a day-to-day basis, you have energy left over for healing, for living longer. If you're using more energy than you really have, you get more tired, you don't live as long, etc. So we're basically doing it to help you have more energy available.
So interesting. So I'm sitting here, and people can't see me because they're listening to me, but my eyes are like growing because I'm all in. I'm like, Harry, when is launch date on this? I love this, and it segues as you're talking about this around energy preservation and emotional triggers. And as I have more conversations with individuals around the future of health, so much of that conversation certainly on the preventative and healing side is around control of emotion and how much of our emotions are actually, they're not just being triggered, but sabotaged by our daily living. And I think that tools that enable us to have greater insight on that are critical for us actually being able to heal and navigate the world. I'm curious your thoughts on those pieces, but for me, this has been a huge realization that my emotions are being sabotaged by all of these other forces. And I've really had to create these very distinct intentional boundaries, but that's taken a ton of work, and that's a lot of awareness, and that's hanging out with people like you. You know, for the average person, I think having some type of biofeedback tool that alerts them and enables them to pair emotional situations with triggers, I think it has the capacity to accelerate a greater understanding and ability to control their healing. I don't have a question there. Like, is this part of the intention? Is this one of the ways we can use it?
I've got a comment.
Good.
Good. So, so how we think about how you master your life, basically to master your life, you need to master your energy and emotions. And so like we have a fairly straightforward process for that we call GIST, that just stands for gratitude, intention, surrender, and trust. The more you're in a grateful state, and there are other good states as well, like appreciation, love, abundance, but the more you're in those heart-centered, open states, the more likely, and I say this is a little bit spiritual, but it's very based in physics, the more likely the universe will respond to your intentions. So then when you set your intentions and goals, because they're coming from that heart-centered place, they're more likely to be like anything that is more likely to be a win for society, yourself, and the other people involved. Like the universe is far more likely to support. And whether you believe in the spiritual physics end or just in a practical manner, I mean, it's true in either, from either viewpoint. And then I say from the surrender and trust, so as you were saying, like how we react to different situations, generally when the universe will bring in your intentions, it doesn't necessarily do it in a way that you might see as logical, and it might come with a little bit of conflict, etc. And that's really where the surrender and trust comes in. So you just surrender and trust that the universe, well, you surrender the how to the universe, and then you trust that the universe has your best or your highest interests at heart for your own learning and unfolding. And I think, the outcome of that, to what you were saying with the emotions, you just don't react to other people's emotions. Just have awareness and gain some understanding from, what that means. And over time, reality will generally it changes you for the better. And then obviously in turn, your own reality also changes for the better too. So, I mean, the whole gem, it's really there to help you master your energy, to master your life. And then we all have within that Energy for Life company, we have an energy mastery program that basically helps you to master your energy and master your life across these 4 quadrants of life, which are social, which is relationships, self as the inner work. There's a lot in health, and wealth. And wealth is really more. It's not. I mean, money is an aspect, but it's really about abundance and how energy flows within and outside of your life.
Harry, what does the future of health look like to you?
What does the future of health look like? So different, a number of aspects. So, today or where we've come from is the last 100 years, we've come from a very chemical based system. Unfortunately, with the Rockefellers like 80, 90 years ago, like a lot of these ideas of supplement energy and energy fields, they actually existed 100 plus years ago. But because Rockefeller wanted to monetize oil into the chemical industry and in turn the pharmaceutical industry, most of these ideas got crushed, and the AMA was formed and universities got formed just to focus on pure big pharma. So that's the problem. So, but if I look going forward, I really see like healthcare and health as being, it's one coin and there's two sides. The chemistry side is totally legitimate, but the bioenergetic side should be its equal partner. So over time, that's where I see the future of basically being able to expand scientists, the public, practitioners, consciousness with these ideas of bioenergetics, and that energy is as equally as important as chemistry. I think the outcome of that is, as people, because these ideas, not only do they improve people's health with less side effects, less toxicity, it also actually improves people's consciousness. And if society is more conscious, we should have less wars, more logical, conscious government. Should be a better, fairer society for all. So that's where I see the future.
I'll take that future any day. I don't even want to go anywhere else because I feel like we're vibrating up here. I do want to throw a few questions at you. I call these our impact ingredients, and these are sort of rapid fire, outside the realm of the conversation we just had, questions really about you. And my first one is, when you need it at a moment's notice, how do you cultivate courage?
I have a big picture in my upstairs living room of a wolf, and the picture is called Face Your Fears. So for me, like I look at fear straight on and do it anyway, generally. I mean, generally fear shows the way of what you should do.
Says the man who fell off mountains and climbs through ice tunnels. And okay. So we have a fairly strong propensity.
It's another mountain, right? It's facing.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's true. As you're telling those stories, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, your poor mother. If my kids, gosh.
She's here on Friday.
Oh, okay. What's your motivational beverage of choice?
Motivational beverage? I don't think I have a drink to motivate me. I've never heard of that question.
I mean, mine is a pot of coffee. So
honestly, I have fizzy mineral water. I don't drink for motivation. For a bit of motivation, I had a little square of chocolate before the podcast to give me a slight boost. So maybe it's chocolate. Okay,
well, I'll take that. What's a non-negotiable for you in your life?
Not living my purpose. That's non-negotiable. I'm here to get bioenergetics out on the planet, and that's what I do. So anything else or any other weird business idea that people come at us with is to me a distraction, and I won't do it.
As an entrepreneur, were you born with it, or did you learn to become an entrepreneur?
As a kid, I thought I was going to do something special and interesting. I absolutely did not know what it would be. I've definitely got that characteristics. I guess if you're asking generally, I do think you can be taught a lot of entrepreneurial skill sets, and you see it over the ages. The most successful companies or entrepreneurs are actually in their 50s and 60s. And so they weren't there's a lot of people who were not entrepreneurs in their 20s and 30s and 40s, and then they became them in their, they worked a career and then became the 50s, 60s. So I do think you can learn it and become it. I think just got to be relatively smart and logical. Yeah.
And last question for you. What do you want your legacy of impact to be?
Exactly what we said. By the time we're dead, it looks like we're society is close, or already is, recognizing and seeing bioenergetics as equally important to health as biochemistry. I'll die a happy man. I'll die happy anyway. I'll die happy anyway.
Harry Massey, I adore your work and what you are putting into the world. Where can we direct people, our practitioners, our entrepreneurial listeners, to learn more about the incredible devices and tools and teachings that you're putting into the world?
So if you're either a practitioner who, is interested in system, or you want to find a practitioner as a client, then go to neshealth.com. Actually, if you're interested in helping and supporting the research, because we're definitely we do like raising money for research, that's bioenergetics.com. That's our non-profit Institute of Bioenergetics. If you're interested in the gem and energy for life, that's energy for, which is like just the number 4, life.com. And in a month or so, it's up for pre-sale as well.
Amazing. Harry Massey, it is a pleasure to have you on the podcast. For anyone looking to those links, you can head on over to meghanwalker.com/podcast. We will hook you up with all the pieces. And Harry, I'm super excited to see you at Impact Lives, where we carry on this conversation about the future of health. Thanks for being with me.
Thank you. It's a wonderful interview.
Impact is what lives on when we leave the room, tuck them in, or step off stage. It is less about what you do, more about how you make them feel, and everything about how you choose to show up in the world. If you enjoyed this podcast, hit subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, or wherever you are listening to this episode. I am your host, Meghan Walker. Until next week.